And since Phil is away doing a good deed, I will read from Emmett Fox. This is from 822. It's titled A Simplified Life. It is unquestionable that the spiritualization of thought does undoubtedly lead the student to simplify their code of life. For so many things that previously seemed important are now found to be unimportant and uninteresting. It is unquestionable, too, that he gradually finds himself meeting different people, reading different books, spending their time differently, and that their conversation naturally changes its quality. These things follow upon the change of heart. Never can they precede it. A quote from Corinthians, "Old things are passed away, behold, all things become new." And then Fox continues, "Now we see how vain is the foolish attempt to cultivate the good opinion of other people under the impression that such a thing can be of any real advantage to us. Jesus has exposed that kind of fallacy once and for all. He says that the applause that follows upon outer acts is the only reward they ever bring, and that results worthwhile are only to be obtained in the secret place of consciousness." And then from Matthew, "Pray to thy Father which is in secret, and thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly." So today I'm going to talk about dealing with life's frequent little deaths. It's a topic that has become more and more necessary, I think I can say, or more and more obviously needed over the last 2 or 3 months, as we've seen pile upon pile of troubled peoples acting out, of troubles even among the people in our own congregation, but even more so among other congregations that I hear about. We've had 2.5 years, more or less, of really tough times. COVID, with all its different losses, because we're not talking about death of the being as the only kind of death. Yes, there's been a lot of that. But what often isn't seen is all of the other losses that are deaths in our world, because we have to give up, or give them up, or they go away from us. Recently, I did a funeral for the, I guess I'll call him the patriarch of the family, who had spent the last 15 years living on the street. The family had continued to try to find him, to rescue him, get him rehabbed, and he'd always go back to the street. He had abandoned them, essentially, in favor of drink. And now he was dead. And the feelings among those in attendance at the funeral were so utterly mixed and heartrending and angry. They were having to deal with someone who had permanently now disappointed them. There wasn't any hope. The hope had died. The hope had died many times. Each time they hoped that he would take what they'd given him and move forward. And each time the hope was broken, the hope died. I also found myself talking with someone who was telling me about this friendship she'd had all of her life, but something 20 years ago, the friend did something that just broke the relationship. And here, so many years later, the grief was still raw for that loss. Now, those are human interaction types of deaths, big deaths and little deaths. But there's so many other kinds that I want to make sure we're thinking of. One of my clients had to come to terms with the loss of 2 relatives, Neither had been really close, but they were still losses, and the loss of a business that she poured her heart into. She'd known it was coming, but even being prepared for its closing, there was still the grief. Other kinds of losses, little deaths, loss of a pet. We've had 2 people in our congregation who've had beloved pets die within the last couple of months. Loss of job prospects. I work with people in lift-on therapy who aren't able to get their jobs anymore because they're too old, or they can't get the kind of jobs they're qualified for or that they want. As examples, losses of treasured objects. I have one of those. Someone stole one of my Yugoslav instruments. It wasn't the best one I owned, but it was the first one I owned. And, it's been 10 years, so every once in a while, I feel myself grieving for its loss. There's loss of the dream or the vision for the future. So many kinds there, whether it's realizing that the person you had your heart set on for the permanent relationship is not going to work out, whether it's, as happened to me, the touring that I loved went away from me. It's gone away from almost every artist who was mid-level or less, unless you're willing to work for $100. We weren't. Loss of treasured relationships, like the lady who was still grieving the friend from where there'd been the rupture so many years ago. Loss of your health. Loss of trust that there will be a good outcome in things in life in general. Or from there, loss in faith in total. And if you think in terms of people you know, you may be able to recognize one or several who have replaced faith with cynicism, with the expectation that worse is going to happen, as a way of protecting themselves from the pain of the little death when a disappointment happens. This was brought home to me, about 2 weeks ago. I was working with a client, and I forget what we were working on, but it ended up that we needed to heal 7 different soul ancestors. In other words, bodies that their soul had inhabited before this one. Because that's where it was. We didn't have to heal her here and now. It was only back here. And she was ecstatic. You mean I can heal them? Yay, sort of thing. Those are my words, not hers, but it was that level of pleasure. Well, the next time we got together to do some work, she told me how her husband had responded when she told him about it. What? You mean we've got to heal other people too? Oh my God. 2 different ways of dealing with the same situation. Hers had the hope. Now, both of them came from abuse. I don't know much about either one, except that the abuse was clearly pretty substantial in both cases from what she tells me. But she's going and moving toward the expectation of better. He is still moving toward the expectation of worse. He's more trapped in the little deaths. She still has little deaths to deal with, but her approach is so different. There's a commentator I read on occasion in response to the Carolyn Hack's advice columns, name of Leo Chen. I know nothing about him except he writes in on occasion. And in this case, he was writing in about loss as his commentary to what the question had been that Carolyn Hack's had answered. And I'm going to read it in total because this addresses it so well. If you think about it, the most consistent life experience that we all share is that of loss. We lose time, money, opportunities, things, friends, family, youth, health, And in the end, we lose our life. And sometimes these losses are not fair. They are indeed tragic, pierce our hearts. As my spiritual mentor Confucius used to say, feel your feelings and feel them deeply and fully, for they are yours, so own them. But the instinctive fear is that my feelings will overwhelm me and destroy me. Thus they are scary and not without reason. Folks can hurt themselves, kill themselves in a desperate effort to escape the deep pain that comes with experiencing great loss. And sometimes those feelings can last a very long time. Thus, Confucius' advice must be tempered by adding that we must allow ourselves to also seek comfort and reassurance from our friends, our family, from grief counselors, and I will add, since he's Buddhist, it would not fit him, and from divine. We all need to seek comfort and guidance and reassurance during our respective journeys through the valley of death that we all walk. And the question that we should ask ourselves with each loss or about each loss is, what have we gained? And that's where he closes. I want to suggest that we have many choices we can make. Witness what I just talked about, the wife and husband, their different responses to the same situation. For each loss, we can look for opportunities for personal growth to come from it. We can value the strength of the impact that whatever this loss is has had on our lives. And if a negative impact, we can value the fact that we have the opportunity to respond differently. That's what's really important. I do a fair number of funeral orations, and some of the hardest is when someone has died tragically and young. And what I try to build my talk on is who they were that contributed to who everyone living is. In each part of our life where there is some sort of loss, it's a loss because before loss, there was a contribution of some sort to our well-being, to our being. And the more we can recognize that and build on that, even though there will be sadness, there can also be joy and an assist to moving forward by virtue of the fact of what that event, that person, that thing, that experience gave us. But I also want to make the point that we are all imperfect beings. Our goal in this earth is to accomplish an ever closer approximation to being divine love and serving divine love. But it's an ever closer approximation. And all of us, every once in a while, will slide back a bit because we are here. Because we aren't fully the Godhead, even though we have the spark of God inside that can direct us if we allow it. So, what do we do when we encounter a personal loss, a personal grief? Well, the first priority is to allow our feelings to express themselves, no matter how much sense we can make of the feelings. The feelings can exist even though rationally it may not fit or make sense. Think of the patriarch who died on the street. And yet the sense of loss, even after so many years, was so palpable. We need to allow ourselves to be aware of how we feel. We need to be in touch with how we feel. We need to allow that feeling to process through. A contrary image, someone I know whose husband's been dead for, I think, going on 50 years now, is still grieving him, still talks about him often, about missing him. Her life has not moved on. Her life has not moved on. And that is not what the divine would have us. Our job here is to grow and learn from experience and build on experience and become closer to the divine, to the support, the succor of the divine in our grief, and to help heal our grief. And if the grief is just as raw now, speaking for myself for the moment, as when my ex-wife ran off with her therapist taking her 2 kids, I'm making a mistake. I'm holding on to what was, as opposed to allowing the divine to bring what is next, because I'm ready and willing to feel the sadness, to allow it to pass through, or even to carry it for a while. And I still occasionally miss those kids. But if I were still pining for that, I would have missed the opportunity I have now to be with a woman who holds my feet to the fire and has helped me become a better person and a very much happier person, and has supported me in my ministry, which my previous wife would never have done. We don't know the future, but if we're holding on to the little griefs as opposed to processing them, letting them go, we're hurting ourselves and we're hurting the world, because our energy is not the energy that lifts the world up. Now, each of us will find, for each loss, our own way. We should allow ourselves to find our own way to grieve and how long it's going to take. But also let yourself be aware when you're digging your feet in the ground and not moving forward with your life, because then you're handicapping yourself. We don't want that to happen. In the agony columns, every so often, a widow or widower writes in, my spouse has been dead a year, 6 months, 2 years. Is it okay if I start looking around for another partner? How long do I have to wait? Or I found someone that I'm beginning a relationship with, and my kids are raising all sorts of hell. How dare I consider marrying somebody else? Well, I'm not even there yet, but I'm seeing somebody, sort of thing. You have to own your own path. And if you're not sure what the path is, you got people in this community to talk with. You got me to talk with, Phyllis to talk with. You can pray, you can meditate. Don't let outsiders in this earth, with our limited perceptions of what is right and wrong based on this earth, define what your walk, your spiritual walk, and your walk toward this ever closer approximation to the divine should be. We do need, now here's a caution, we do need to face each new reality, positive and not positive, and adjust to it. Otherwise, we'll end up spending so much energy trying to keep a time warp. And in politics right now, if you look, there are many people who are trying to establish a time warp. Oh, things were so much better in the 50s. We must force our way back there, or things of that nature. Another example is the stereotypical 45, 50-year-old man ditches his wife, buys a bright red sports car, starts hanging jewelry down his chest, and starts squiring around 20-something models. That's holding on to the past. That's fear of what's next. And if we are in a spiritual path, while we may have some discomfort because we don't know what the future is, and we never will, well, occasionally God gives us a glimpse. We need to move forward in order to continue our walk with the divine. And then, of course, there's the perfect one of people who are having their beloved pets stuffed or turned into clones, as opposed to letting a new beast in that needs a home. Recently, actually today, my wife read a piece from the AA book, 24 Hours a Day, and it seemed appropriate to bring to a close here. And the reading is, constantly claim God's strength. Once convinced of a right course of action, one reasonably made under God's guidance, claim that strength now. You can claim all the strength you need to meet any situation. You can claim a new supply when your own strength is exhausted. You have a right to claim it, and you should use your right, to which I add, as a member of the divine, carrying the spark of the divine within you. The reading goes on, a beggar supplicates, a child appropriates. When you supplicate, you're often kept waiting. You're begging, basically. But when you appropriate God's strength in a good cause, you have it all at once. Emmett Fox says, stake your claim in one of his books. This is saying, stake your claim for God's strength. Stake your claim for God's strength. And I want to make the note that God's strength doesn't always come from the supernatural. It's not that you spend all night on your knees praying and all of a sudden, boing, you arise with a big S on your chest or a big G on your chest. Sometimes the strength comes through your spiritual community or your network of friends and acquaintances, or sometimes even your beloved pets. So the sum is, in all little deaths, keep them in proportion. Have the courage to walk forward, to grieve, to let the grief pass through, and to move forward to what's new. Knowing that you can call on the strength, the succor, the caring that you need from the divine, from all the angels, from all the spirit guides, from friends, from family. The future you make with the help of God is always better than the past when you don't try to hold on to the grief and the pain. So I thought we'd close by doing a lift healing that reflects this talk. I'm going to set it up in chat, so open your chat if you haven't already. And I'll read it to you once and then we'll go ahead and heal it. I build and maintain constant connection with all sources of God's wisdom and strength to help me get the best out of every day in my life. So if you will, make sure you're on mute, right over left self-hug. We're going to say this just 3 times out loud together. And if for some reason you can't read the chat, just hum along and we'll take the humming to be the words on your behalf. Ready? I build and maintain constant connection with all sources of God's wisdom and strength to help me get the best out of every day in my life. I build and maintain constant connection with all sources of God's wisdom and strength to help me get the best out of every day in my life. I build and maintain constant connection with all sources of God's wisdom and strength to help me get the best out of every day in my life. And then can I have an amen from everyone? So we thank you, God, for having brought us together today. We thank you for allowing us to care, to love together, to grow together. We thank you for having guided us here today so that we could learn and become closer to you and better servants to you. We thank you for allowing us to occasionally see the miracles that you work as a way of enhancing our faith. We thank you for having allowed us a faith whether or not we see any of your works. We thank you for putting us to work as we depart from here. Help us to be tender to your spirit, to your guidance each and every day, both for our own growth in you, our own experience with you, and in our response to those around us who need love, who need help, who need healing. We thank you for guiding our feet, keeping us safe, enlightening us, wising us up, and guiding us back here for our next time together. We give you full gratitude for the good in our lives, dear God. We say thank you, thank you, thank you, and amen.
Amen.